I will be starting my time in three, two, oh, sorry. Before that, quick off time roadmap. I'm going to be starting with the affirmations case and then negations case. Okay, my time starts in three, two. Hello, everybody. My name is Daniel. I'll be the first negation speaker in today's debate under the resolution that this House would limit the Supreme Court's ability to overturn acts of Congress. Um, Now, we agree with the affirmations definitions as well as the value criterion. And the negation in today's debate is going to be arguing for why the status quo is better. The affirmation's first contention about democracy and how there's a lot more Democrats in the US right now. However, the Supreme Court is more conservative. I would like to first clarify one thing. Conservative and Republican are not the same. The Supreme Court is not Republican. While it is slightly conservative, not by that much. There's a thing called a Martin Quinn score, which was developed by researchers at the University of Michigan, which ranks Supreme Court justices on a scale of positive numbers to negative numbers. The more negative you are, the more liberal you are, the more positive, the more conservative you are. That number is just slightly positive. It's not that conservative. So while they would like to use the fact that there are more conservative justices than liberal justices, the overall balance of liberal ideology to conservative ideology is it's a slim difference. But then moving on to the rest of their contention about how there's going to be that the Supreme Court is unequal representation and why Congress is better. However, they do not solve for this. They're not suddenly removing the Senate, which they are arguing is the unrepresentative part, because the Senate confirms Supreme Court justices. Senate is also what passes bills. The House doesn't pass bills, Congress does. They have to go through the House and the Senate. So if they aren't removing for the Senate's unrepresentative nature, because it's based on land, not on people, then they aren't solving for this unrepresentative nature on the Supreme Court. They also mentioned how this isn't direct representation and how that is inherently bad. Well, I would like to remind the judges that we don't vote on laws either. Congress does that. We vote for representatives to then push our values into Congress. We vote on people who we believe are a good representation and who will better understand these laws. It's unfair to believe that every single person in the United States can write legislature or is able to accurately argue for why something is good or bad. That's why we elect people who we believe understand this process well, who will be able to accurately reflect our values and our beliefs in government. So direct representation actually doesn't exist at any level in our government. So how can we say that it's inherently bad if it's been working for the past hundreds of years? Now, the second contention about progressiveness, they mentioned how the Supreme Court is going to revert Roe v. Wade, how they're going to mess with elections, climate change, and the pandemic. First of all, some of these links are a complete stretch. They provided no evidence as to why the Supreme Court is suddenly going to stop us from stopping pandemics, climate change, and strike down on voting rights. There's no evidence that the new court is going to do this. And even if they did, the other branches have so much power over the judiciary, which is something I'll get into more in the negation case, that they can just revert these decisions. More specifically, for Roe v. Wade, the legislature can just pass an amendment to the Constitution protecting a woman's right to a safe abortion. But once again, the House isn't making the laws, Congress does. So you would need both the House and the Senate to do it. Same thing goes for elections, climate change, and the pandemic. If it's an interpretation of laws, the legislative body can just pass a law to change that interpretation. If it is a constitutional interpretation, the legislative body can pass an amendment to change that interpretation. Now getting into the negations case. So we're going to be arguing for the status quo and why that is better than what the affirmation is proposing to do. For our first contention, representation. Once again, this is indirect representation. We are choosing educated scholars who we believe will be able to interpret the Constitution and protect the rights granted by it, so that those are not encroached on by Congress or the executive. So we are electing people to the Senate who we believe will represent our values and will choose Supreme Court justices based on those values. The second part of this contention is that all of these justices have to pass through a highly selective, highly intensive Senate hearing. They are indirectly being elected by the people. Everything about them, their past decisions, their lives, who they know, who they don't know, that is all out for everybody to see. Nothing even close to that invasive or intrusive or eye-opening happens to anybody elected to Congress. So we know much more about these Supreme Court justices than we do about Congress members. We're able to know exactly what they believe in, what their past voting decisions are. Some of the people elected to Congress have never even held a position in government before. They have no experience voting on legislature, drafting it, even discussing these things. But the justices elected to the Supreme Court of the United States, they have been lawyers, they have been the top students, they have been judges for years before even being granted the opportunity to be on the Supreme Court. So we know that they have the abilities, the knowledge, and the experience to be able to do this. And this means that most of the time they'll represent what the people want. They'll be able to accurately represent what the country needs and what it wants, what its values are, and what the direction should be going forward. But there is a slight chance that they could be wrong. That has happened in the past, and we are not denying that. However, moving into my second contention, they have no power when they're truly wrong. The judiciary is one of the most checked branches of the US government. They can be checked by the executive because they have no power to enforce any of their decisions. Some of the biggest examples of this have been the Trail of Tears, when President Jackson refused to uphold the Supreme Court's decision, and Native Americans were marched to their death through the winter. The Supreme Court has no power to enforce their decisions. So if they do make a decision that is unreflective, it won't be upheld. A similar thing with the desegregation of public schools, with Brown versus the Board of Education. Many state governments refuse to uphold this decision. So as we can see, SCOTUS has no power. And even though they were morally wrong here, we're talking about representation. People wanted something that was morally wrong, but a majority of people wanted it. Now we have a much more progressive, much more morally right government. So things of this severity won't occur, but these are examples just to show that SCOTUS has no power when they are not representing the majority of people. Similarly, with the legislative branch, they have so many checks. First of all, amendments to change constitutional interpretation. This has happened with Chisholm versus Georgia in 1795 with the passing of the 11th Amendment, Dred Scott versus Sanford in 1868, Pollock versus Farmers Loan and Trust Co. in 1913, and then two more times in 1920 and 1971. Congress frequently does this. They pass amendments to change what the Supreme Court voted on because it is unrepresentative of the people. So Congress is upholding that on the slight occasion that they are wrong. And in the decision that it is just a ruling on the interpretation of a law, simple legislative action can easily reverse these decisions. So for this reason, the affirmations plan is only removing the power that the Supreme Court has in a good way. They're removing the good power that the Supreme Court has to protect the rights of US citizens. Because when the Supreme Court is wrong, it doesn't have any power. For these reasons, judges, I urge a strong vote in the negations case. Thank you.
Oh yeah, Jack Turner sounds. Cross-examinations, let me get up my timer. 2 minutes. All right. Sorry, time will start now. Do you, oh, actually, sorry, I have too much on my timer. Would you consider representative that Brett Kavanaugh was appointed by a president who lost the popular vote and then was elected, and then in the Senate, a majority of senators elected not to confirm him?
So can you break that down into two questions? So first you're asking why Trump was elected?
Do you consider it representative of the people? Is Brett Kavanaugh's Supreme Court position representative of what Americans want?
It's representative of what the people voted for. People didn't vote. A lot of people didn't vote in the election of President Trump. So that's not a fault of the Supreme Court or of our legislative body. People didn't vote. If people don't vote, our government cannot function at all. Our government works off the basis that people will vote, because it works in the sense that the
sorry,
majority will pass the things that they want.
Let me rephrase
So
the
if a
question.
majority doesn't vote, then it's going to be the majority that votes that is represented, not the true majority.
So Brett Kavanaugh, the majority of people did not vote for those politicians that voted in Brett Kavanaugh. Is he still representative of the American people?
Once again, people voted for those Senate representatives. A lot of people didn't vote in those elections. If neither case solves for this, the issue is with people voting. If people voted, if everybody in the country who could vote voted, then it would actually be representative of the people. In these elections that you're talking about, many people didn't vote.
I'm going to save the rest of my time for later.
Government can only function if people vote, because otherwise it's reflecting the values of only those who can vote.
Yeah, thank you. All right, 32 seconds. I have 8 minutes for my speech. Give me a second to get my thoughts ready. All right, time will start now. Hello, my name is Adam Weiland. I'm the second speaker for the affirmation in today's debate. Again, affirming the resolution that Congress should limit the Supreme Court's abilities to overturn acts of Congress. And remember, we define limiting as making it so the court needs a supermajority, 7 out of 9 justices voting, to be able to overturn acts of Congress, to overturn these laws that have been voted on by Congress. So I'm going to go over my opponent's arguments first. So their first contention is that of representation. And they tell us that, in fact, the Supreme Court is quite representative of the American people because we have these rigorous hearings and because the Senate has to vote on them and because they're educated. The fact of the matter is that this simply isn't true. It's faulty logic. First and foremost, we proved to you in our case, in our first contention, how the Supreme Court is not representative whatsoever. Again, 3 Supreme Court justices were appointed by a president who lost the popular vote. Actually, more than that, because George W. Bush also lost the popular vote his first time. So that's not representative. Second of all, a lot of these Supreme Court justices, like Brett Kavanaugh, like Amy Coney Barrett, thank you. They actually lost. The majority of senators did not vote to confirm them. So that again is not representative. And additionally, because a majority of registered voters in America identify as Democrats, and because the Democrats in the Senate represent a larger percentage of the population than the Republicans in the Senate do. For this reason as well, these Supreme Court justices and the fact that the Supreme Court is controlled by conservatives and conservative values is not representative of the American people. And don't buy their argument that just because they're conservatives, that doesn't mean they're Republican. The Republican and conservative go hand in hand. And besides, even if it's only a slightly positive score, that still is a positive score. And they were all appointed by these Republicans. Then they talked about these Senate hearings, how the Senate hearings are really, really good at getting rid of the bad candidates. That's not true. Brett Kavanaugh was shown to be a sexual assaulter in a Senate hearing, and he was still confirmed, even though a majority of senators didn't vote to confirm him. Amy Coney Barrett couldn't even remember the entire First Amendment. She was still confirmed. Justice, I can't remember his name now. He was appointed. A third justice was also shown to be a sexual assaulter. Clarence Thomas, thank you, and he was still appointed. So the hearing process is not good. It does not make it representative. And finally, they talked about how justices are much more educated than Congress and people want them. This is not necessarily true. Amy Coney Barrett actually only had a couple years as a judge before becoming a Supreme Court justice. And besides, doesn't really carry any weight in the rounds because the Senate is more representative. Now, their second contention was that of no power. They talked about how the Supreme Court already has no power. So apparently there's no points to make it so that they have even less power. This isn't true. Again, they struck down 600 something laws or whatever number my brother gave you. And striking down the laws, it does stay true. They can't really overturn the Supreme Court's decision. They give a couple examples about Trail of Tears, etc. Don't buy this point. There are always checks and balances in our governments, but it's clear, and we talked about how they struck down these mask mandates, so on and so forth, and the abortion ban, that the checking is not powerful enough right now. They certainly do have power. You can make this argument checks and balances for any aspect of our government. It just doesn't really carry any weight in this round. And then they talked about how it is Oh, how it is more morally right for the legislation to be how the legislation can amend the Constitution if they want to. This isn't really true. It is incredibly difficult to amend the Constitution itself. You need a two-thirds majority, I think more than that actually, of all of these states, not the people, the states, to vote for the amendment. They gave a couple examples from the 1700s, one in 1971. This is not a practical way to go about passing laws in our country, to go about passing legislation. So it's not a good workaround the problem that we have now in the status quo, which is a non-representative conservative majority on the Supreme Court that will continue to strike down progressive legislation and hurt our country. So overall, their case can be, again, it can pretty much, their first contention can be refuted with our first contention. It is not representative. And their second contention can simply be refuted by the fact that it has no real power in the surrounds. We have basically proven to you why they do have too much power now, and they need to be checked specifically with congressional laws, and why it is good. And again, it's still 7-9. So if there's something still very, very unconstitutional, it will still be limited. But we're simply limiting their power a little bit, so they don't have the same abuse of power that they do now. Now I'm going to go over our case. Again, our first contention was that of democracy. We talked about how more Americans are Democrats rather than Republicans. 6 of the 9 judges are conservative. And all these statistics that we gave you, they simply said conservatives and Republicans aren't the same thing. And this scale that they have, it's rated as only slightly conservative. First and foremost, even if it is true that it's only slightly conservative, and I don't see why this is true, because again, 6 out of 9 judges are conservative. That's still not representative whatsoever, even if it's slightly positive, because the tilt is clearly more than slightly to the left. So this point still passes through, and they're still passing conservative legislation. We talked about representations, why it's important. And they said that this is not solving for this because the Senate is more unrepresentative. That's another issue. The Senate is unequal as well, but the Supreme Court is more so. And again, our points about the Republican policy thrives off of overturning bills, small governments, that flows through. So the idea that Republicans thrive off of when the Supreme Court is more powerful, this flows through. Our second warrant was about indirect democracy. We talked about how it's never been very democratic because it's not really direct. And they simply said that nothing is direct. But the fact of the matter is that the Supreme Court is even more indirect because it goes through kind of 2 rounds of voting. And also because they serve for life, even if like with Clarence Thomas, a lot of people want to get rid of him, but they can't because he serves for life, which is even more undemocratic. With his indirect democracy that we have with the Senate and Congress and the president, it overturns, so citizens have the chance to vote and have their voices heard again. The Supreme Court is worse because it is for life. Our second contention, and the impacts of this point were just of this contention of democracy, is degradation of democracy if we don't do our plan, and our plan improves our democracy, and what the people actually want happens. Our second warrant was that of second contention was that of progressiveness. We talked about how the Supreme Court has been poisoned. Mitch McConnell's political maneuvering has made it very conservative and partisan, and it's not going to change for a long time because these people are served for life, and they're not that old yet. And that it's going to be the Republican strong tool against progressive legislation. They did not respond to this. This flows through. Our first warrant was about abortion. This is an incredibly important point in the rounds. We talked about how the Supreme Court is going to strike down abortion laws all over the country and the negative effects this would have. They simply said you can just pass an amendment to change the Constitution. Again, this is ludicrously difficult to do and is simply not an answer to this because you need 2/3 or more than 2/3 of states to vote for it. It's almost impossible. And then our third warrant about climate change, they simply said we had no links. This is not true. Their corporate interests, Republicans are against climate change. Democrats are for. So this does. And then warrant for a pandemic, they also said we had no links, even though we gave you specific evidence with the mask mandates, with ordering California to keep its churches open in person during the height of the pandemic. So don't buy this argument that we don't have any links. We do. And for these reasons, please vote for the affirmation of today's round. Thank you.
Okay, if everyone is ready, I'll be starting my time in 3, 2, 1. Hello, everyone. My name is Kenzo Yi. I'll be your second negation speaker in today's debate. Under the resolution, this House would limit the Supreme Court's ability to overturn acts of Congress. Okay, so first off, to give you a brief on-time roadmap, I'll be going over AF's plan and contentions and refuting them, and then going back into next case. Okay, so first of all, they said that it's only slightly conservative to our response that the Martin Quinn score is very close to 0. And they said that this is very difficult to believe. And however, the reasoning for this is because the justices actually, the Martin Quinn score is based on the justices' actual decisions when it comes to voting, not their personal opinions or not how many exact conservatives there are, which is exactly why it's so close to 0, especially to address the conservative justices, rather than voting on their personal opinions and on their far right opinions, whatever they may be, they vote closer to the 0, creating the neutral. And they voted against the presidents that appointed them. They said that the Supreme Court is even more indirect for our response to democracy. However, just like laws are voted by the Senate, just as laws are voted on by Congress, the Supreme Court is voted on by the Senate, giving it a more holistic view of voting. And because people can't vote for laws on their own, can't be handled with these opinions, Supreme Court justices should be left up to the Congress and elected officials who are more qualified than regular people. And they said that they serve for life. And however, justices have been impeached before, so there are checks going against them. And just because they may vote for life and because it may doesn't mean that they necessarily will, and also disregards the possibility of them doing a good job and all of those that haven't been impeached and didn't need to be impeached, just to focus on issues such as abortion, elections, climate change, mass mandates. And to address that, climate change wasn't really given much reasoning behind it. They just said that it requires action if it's not opposed or something like that. And for abortion, we already see how states are actually not upholding the abortion laws set by Supreme Court, such as like Texas, and people are also protesting this decision. And since there's all this pushback, it will mean that the Supreme Court's final decision isn't actually final, as AF paints it out to be. And because the Supreme Court doesn't have the ability to actually enforce these laws at the state or at any level, people will disregard this, or governments will disregard this as long as it goes against what they believe, which just shows how we maintain representation. However, on the flip side, Supreme Courts have actually made good decisions and passed laws. And when they do pass laws that are representative of people's decisions, it is only like given as agreement towards or confirms people's beliefs that a law should be a certain way, or else there will be this pushback. So Supreme Court essentially gives their good opinions and people will follow it, or when it doesn't, it won't be upheld anyways. So, which actually shows how reduced the power of the Supreme Court is. And for their other issues of fraudulent elections, and this didn't really make sense. And yes. And they said how the presidents weren't elected by popular vote, and however, we have to believe that our government functions similarly, or can function similarly to the presidential elections when it comes to the election of justices. And for the negations case, our point on representation is actually a point for us, because they said that 3 Supreme Court justices have been appointed by presidents, and people didn't vote to confirm 2 of the justices, and that it's really conservative. However, it's not as conservative as they paint it out to be. And when it comes to decisions, again, regardless of the negatives of these justices that AF wants you to believe, as long as they make choices that are good in laws, it wouldn't actually have a major impact. And they didn't demonstrate the impacts of actually any of or either Amy Coney Barrett or Brett Kavanaugh when it comes to their actual choices in decision making or in upholding laws. And since it's just as representative as Congress, and only because there's a higher standard for these justices and the high amount of attention that's given to all the hearings, it only means that the people's voices and everyone's opinions will be considered in the election or in the appointment processes of the justices. And for the second contention of no power, they said that that they've struck 600 laws, and however, anything can be overturned. It's just that you wouldn't see it at every single level for every single law. You only see it in the bigger cases because they would, since the Supreme Court is upholding what the majority wants, it's not worth it to review every single law and try to overturn it, because it doesn't mean that just because 600 laws were struck that these were all bad. And so this wasn't really given much weight to it just because they haven't pointed to what this did by striking these laws, because that wasn't a pro or a con. And then they didn't give any reason to disregard the example of Trail of Tears, as this demonstrates the little impact of the Supreme Court and how when their voices are overruled, it can lead to such detrimental decisions being made. And every single time that an amendment has been made, there's been around like 5 or more, and every single time that the Supreme Court's decisions are overturned, essentially this is just in favor of representation, only leaving the Supreme Court to make good decisions where it isn't overturned, and so for their decisions to become actually final. And for these reasons, I urge a strong vote for the negation side. Thank you.
Okay, we have like 32 seconds left. 38 seconds, I'm sorry. Left in our cross examinations. So we have one more question for you guys. Time starts now. Considering that the US electorate has a 9% lean towards Democrats, why does the scale you reference show that Republicans have more power in the Supreme Court if it really is representative of the electorate?
Well, it pushes slightly conservative ideals, and we want to make the distinction between this and Republican. And also, this is an issue of voting, as my partner has said, because the same issues can happen if people don't vote for their Congress members or the presidents. It can happen at any level. And
all right, yeah, I think that's all the time. All right, thank you.
Okay. Is everybody ready? Then I will be starting my time in 3, 2, 1. Hello again, everybody. My name is Daniel, and I'll be doing the negation voter issue speech in today's debate. And I'm going to be talking about representation because that's really where this debate has come down. The affirmation is putting more strength into Congress, and the negation is leaving some strength in SCOTUS. However, we have multiple times in today's debate stated how that power is only voicing the good voice of the people. Whenever they voice something that is not truly representative, it is just overturned, stricken down by either the executive or the legislative body. SCOTUS has no true power but to reinforce the good word of the majority. So based on representation, what's more representative, Congress or the justices on the Supreme Court? Justices on the Supreme Court are elected by the Senate. The Senate is also essential in passing all bills. So the Senate, just like they pass bills, just like they vote on bills, votes on justices. It's the exact same thing. The affirmation does not solve for that fact. They are saying how their plan is going to be so much more representative. However, it's exactly the same. If anything, they are just stifling the good word the Supreme Court could say, reinforcing good decisions and making them precedent. They are only stifling that because just as the Senate is essential in passing bills, they are also the people choosing the justices. So if people aren't voting, if the Senate is unrepresentative, well, then the bills passed are going to be unrepresentative. It doesn't matter what the Supreme Court is doing. Secondly, Congress members don't have to have had any previous experience in government. All justices have had years being lawyers, judges. They have had years in school and have been background checked and their lives laid open for the people to see. People know exactly what they're getting themselves into. Senators know exactly what they're getting themselves into when they vote for justices, which is not something everybody could say for members of Congress, making justices more representative of the people. Now, I'd like to reiterate the basis of our government. The basis of our government is that people vote on what they feel, and then the government is able to use that information and vote to accurately represent it. If people are not voting, if people aren't voting for the election of the president, well, then the president is going to voice the opinions and the values of the minority. They are going to put justices on the court that they agree with. However, I'd like to add again, these justices have ruled against the presidents that have appointed them. Kavanaugh and Barrett have ruled against Trump in cases. They are conservative, but they are not Republican. They value conservative ideals, but they are not bound to a party. They just voice their interpretation of the Constitution, not their own personal beliefs. So the basis of our government functions based on the idea that people vote. When people don't vote for their senators, then the senators don't vote accurately for justices. But also, if people don't vote accurately, then senators aren't voting accurately for bills. So how can we say that Congress has any more power in terms of representation than the justices on the Supreme Court? They don't. The only power that the Supreme Court has, or in representation, greater representation, is that we know much more about these justices. They have much more experience in the field. They have a history, and we know it. Therefore, justices have a greater representation. We know more about them. And therefore, even if neither is exactly accurate, justices still are able to more accurately represent the values of the system. And in case they don't, once again, they have no power. It has happened time and time again throughout history. Actions have been reversed by the legislative, which can happen at any time. Justices can be impeached if they truly are not representing the voice of the people. But when that doesn't happen, they voice the good word and they stay there and they set good precedent. And when they don't, it's reversed. So all the affirmation is doing is taking the good voice from them. And for that reason, Judge, I urge a strong vote in the status quo, the negation. Thank you.
All right, I have 5 minutes for my speech. Get the timer. All right. Time starts now. Hello, my name is Jack Weiland. I am the first speaker for the affirmation to today's debate again. So what are we doing under this resolution? The House would limit Supreme Court's ability to overturn acts of Congress. Again, we defined limiting, we're just limiting their powers, making it so it's a supermajority rather than the majority that it is today. So let's get into what this case looks like. So both sides argued about if the Supreme Court is representative or not. We proved that it is unrepresentative and it's only becoming more so. We showed how it is only becoming more so as the Republicans turn to it as their most powerful tool. They tried to answer with this. They tried to answer with all these arguments around all these checks on the court, and they try to answer that, oh, but the Senate confirms, etc. They're just using these degrees of separation to argue that the Supreme Court is a representative, while it is clearly not. Justices stay for life. Justices do not represent the majority of Americans, even using their own argument of this scale that shows that it is more conservative on the court that it is liberal, even though the majority of voting Americans are liberal. Both sides agree it is unrepresentative. You can't agree with their arguments. Also, they hedge all their arguments around checks on the court. We proved how this is not true. There are not these checks on the court of overturning these laws made by Congress. Changing the Constitution is impossibly difficult. Impeachment is impossibly difficult. Court decisions are essentially final in the partisan society we live in today. They reference these hearings about how confirmation of senators work. We point out 3 examples of our justices, and there are only 9 justices on the court who were confirmed despite the horrible things that came up in their hearings. Brett Kavanaugh was proved to be a rapist. Amy Coney Barrett couldn't remember the First Amendment, and there were allegations of sexual assault against Clarence Thomas. All these people were still confirmed, and all of them were nominated, or at least Coney Barrett and Kavanaugh were nominated by a president who lost the popular vote, which is unrepresentative, and then approved by a Senate that did not represent the majority of Americans. So their whole argument about the Supreme Court has no power just makes no sense, because of course government has power. Let's get into impacts and the voting issues in this round. So we showed how continuing down this path, continuing down using the status quo that we have today is dangerous. Things will only get worse from here with this unrepresentation that we have in our court. Progressive legislation will not get passed and things will get bad. The status quo is bad, but we solve for the status quo by making it so it is harder for the Supreme Court to overturn these laws. And we pointed to some direct laws that they will be overturning. For instance, abortion, how there's an abortion law. Roe v. Wade is going to get stricken down because of the conservative Supreme Court very, very soon. And the only way to stop that is by passing this law that is in Congress right now that is currently going to offer abortion rights to all Americans. But then the Supreme Court will strike down this law and people will not have access to abortion anymore. This is concrete evidence. This is something that is concrete that is going to happen if we don't limit Supreme Court's power on overturning these laws. This law will be overturned. Abortion will not be accessible in the United States or illegal in the United States for millions and millions of women. This leads to dehumanization, decreasement of women's rights, and death. Then we also made the point about pandemic. Pandemic laws have been struck down and will only be struck down more in the future. This is, again, something concrete we can point to that has already been happening in the status quo and is why we need to change the status quo. This has already led to more death. It has already led to a longer onset of the pandemic. And these are concrete impacts we can point to. Then we also talked about voting laws, how voting laws in Congress, there are voting laws that are almost going to get passed in Congress now, but will only be overturned by this conservative Supreme Court. They show signs of cancellation by the court. And if these voting laws cannot be passed because states are making their own, we need federal laws. This leads to disenfranchisement and even less representation in our society. Now let's go over the opponent's case. So what makes this round so weighted towards the AF is that the fact that our opponents have virtually no offense. Their arguments have no impacts. There are no reasons, they can give no reasons as to why what we are doing, why changing it to 7 out of 9 votes instead of a majority of votes. They can give no reasons as to why this is bad. They can point to no concrete impacts why this is bad. Their arguments don't matter. They have no offense. All of their arguments are only trying to decrease hours. They say, oh no, but the Supreme Court's representative. We're not even getting rid of the Supreme Court. They say there are already checks and balances, but they can't show you, they can't point to concrete ideas of why limiting their powers and why giving Congress more powers is bad. They can't show how by Congress being able to pass this legislation with fewer checks and balances. And again, they still have checks and balances. We're not eliminating checks and balances on Congress. I mean, the Senate is essentially a check and balance on Congress. They can't give any of these concrete impacts while we give these super concrete impacts of abortion, the pandemic, voting laws, and again, representation. We need to make our democracy more representative of the people and keeping the status quo, keeping the Supreme Court having these unfair powers over the legislature, and which is much more representative of the American people because elections happen every 2 years, at least for House of Representatives. Because of all these reasons, please vote for the affirmation in today's debate.
Okay, good debate, everybody. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good debate.
Good job, you guys.
Thank you.
Good job, everyone.
I'm assuming the last judge with the decision and will disclose. Yeah, so mine is in, so
I'm
the
still
third
submitting
person
mine.
should see the decision.
I submitted my ballot. I submitted mine as well.
Okay, so one of you, the last one in, should have seen the decision. I can't see it because I was in. I can go ahead. I was just beginning to type my RFD, so I would just say that I agreed with Jack at the end when he said that the negation was began their case by saying we're going to defend the status quo, but there wasn't really any offense against the Aft case that it would be better. There wasn't any like disads to what would happen if we had the 7-9. And I really didn't pick up any real argument for the status quo as to why the status quo is better than the situation would be in there. So there's other things, but that would be probably my main reason. I don't know if any of the other judges want to give any feedback.
I wrote a lot of notes. To summarize, I like the government arguments. The points what they made in terms of the representation, I liked it. The opposition, the first speaker, he brought up a lot of points in terms of why the indirect representation still represents the majority of the Americans. Somehow I didn't see the flow in the second speaker. I could see a lot of disconnects. I could see the opposition as a team. They are not synchronous in their argument.
I provided my RFD on the ballot, which I think should be visible to you guys soon, but I think I'll just give my feedback to both teams here. I feel like on the affirmation side, you guys could have, in the beginning, in the first speech, you were linking your contentions to terminal impacts quite well, but I felt you could have done this more in the later speeches when you provided like further elaboration on your arguments, because at some point it felt like a lot of factual refutation, like that wasn't really being woven out enough. On the negation side, I feel like you guys could have, I don't know how applicable it is, but maybe it might have been more to your advantage to have provided an alternative to what the affirmation was proposing, as in like besides keeping the status quo, because both of you were agreeing about the fact of like indirect representation. So maybe it would have like solidified your, maybe it would have provided more offense for you if you had done that. But yeah, that's my feedback.
The thing I do want to make sure I vote on the case that's presented, but I do think the thing that was kind of left out of the debate is like what the Supreme Court's, the purpose of allowing the Supreme Court to overturn those decisions is, which is kind of to protect, at least is the way I see it in my teaching, is that it's to protect kind of the Constitution from unchecked will of the people. And nobody really addressed that, which I thought was interesting because I kind of expected to hear it. And so that was just something that I was surprised we didn't hear in the debate. But like I said, I didn't, it's not a consideration in my decision, but. And yeah, I kind of felt the third and fourth speakers also, a lot of some of the arguing against was just kind of dismissing rather than giving me more significant reasons why you were dismissing it. Like saying something doesn't make sense doesn't help me because maybe it makes sense to me. So, so you have to tell me why it doesn't make sense. So that's my additional feedback.
Thank you guys.
All right. Thank
All
you.
right, thank you,
Thank you,
judges.
everyone.
Thank you, everybody.
Take care.
Thank you. Bye.